Hey, what's up everybody? It's Lids, and we're back for some more Gwent, and today we're looking at the second round of the Gwent Balance Council vote changes. In case you missed it, there was a last-minute change where rather than having 15 changes per category, now we only have 5 changes per category. So overall, far less changes than there were last time round. And if you want more info on that, in addition to one other change that will affect next round of the Balance Council votes, then check out this video. But now let's go over all the changes and a little bit of a reflection on what that means for each card, and maybe a little bit overall what that means big picture. So starting with the power increase, and remember all these changes are by exactly 1. So Great Oak, 1 point stronger than it was before, and I mean once upon a time this was one of the best finishers for Scoia'tael. That was a while ago though, and now it's not very often you see people using Great Oak, so I mean I guess I can see it. It seems a little bit strange to me, seeing as how there are now only 5 cards changed in this category, that Great Oak was a high enough priority for that to win. But hey, a cool card that I would like to see people use more often. Then we have Nausicaa Sergeant. Now this is a card that got a power decrease last time round, now bumping back up to 4 power. And to be honest, this card should not be a bronze. Any card that can play multiple cards per turn, I think, should be limited. Once upon a time, that was something that the Gwent developers seemed to think, and that has long since gone down the drain. So Nausicaa Sergeant, once again, back to the power it was before. Same can be said now for Reaver Hunters. This was a card that we reduced down to 1 power last time round. Obviously, that was one of, if not the single biggest red flag from the previous voting results, because that meant Reaver Hunters were completely unusable, the weakest card in the entire game. So good to see that this is at least back to being a usable card. Yes, it's a really annoying card, I agree, but I even chose to vote for this because I think we needed to set a precedent that it was unacceptable for us to make a card completely unplayable, although some people did make some interesting counter arguments that there was a case to be made that if you just didn't want Reaver Hunters to exist at all, since we obviously don't have a way to outright ban a card, by making Reavers so bad that it was unplayable, that was the closest thing we could get to that. Overall though, I think increasing its provision cost perhaps multiple times, if we really do want to see Reaver Hunters get balanced in a more appropriate way, that is probably the way to do it. Alba Armored Cavalry, another card that got a 1 power nerf last time round, now getting reversed here, so up to 5 power. Obviously, people are very familiar with what a 5 power Alba Armored Cavalry plays like, because it's been the case for a very long time. Then Oak Critters, up to 3 base power. I mean, this has been a pretty weak card for quite a long time. Even with the devotion, not great, and now at least maybe you'll see some people use it, so that's kind of nice to see. It's also kind of interesting that we have 2 Treants for Scoia'tael that are getting buffed here, and maybe that will have some implications for Harmony, but I think more likely, if anything, Saskia Commander and Oak Critters. You usually did want to get a Treant in there, and Oak Critters was the only bronze Treant you could use, and well, with no deployability, getting what was previously a 2 base power unit on the board from Saskia was not great. But now it's a power decrease, so we have Madame Marquise Serenity dropping to 4 power. I'll be honest, I've personally not really used her much at all, so I can't really speak to the specifics here, other than at least with that tribute ability, she had both a lot of tempo and engine potential. Rainfarn, this is an interesting one, because since he's a disloyal unit, decreasing his power is actually a buff, not a nerf, so he was pretty uncommon to see people use, because you had to have some pretty huge cards to play him next to for him to pay off, because handing your opponent 7 points was not an easy thing to do, so probably it makes sense. Again, as for whether that's something that I personally would have prioritized, maybe not, but I can at least see where people are coming from, and it makes sense. Joachim, also disloyal, and therefore a power decrease means that this is a buff. I mean, Joachim, he's really annoying to play against. He used to be really common and pretty strong. Power creep has made him a little weaker relative to other cards, but not to the same extent as some of the other ones that we saw on the power increase category. He's another card that I guess technically kind of sort of plays multiple cards per turn. It does, however, interestingly mean that hitting him with a coup, which he is one of, if not the single most popular card to hit with coup, that will destroy him, which means that you are definitely activating coup even if your opponent has purified the spying status off of Joachim. Lord Reaptide, I mean, this has been a really strong card ever since it got introduced. I expected for Ogroids to be targeted in some way, shape, or form. This wasn't necessarily the card that I thought was going to be most likely to get changed, but not only does this decrease the amount of points that Riptide is worth on your side of the board, but it also, because he clashes, means that he's dealing less damage as well. So this is actually a pretty significant change for that reason. Then Incubus, I mean, yeah, it was, at least when played correctly, capable of scoring a whole bunch of points by summoning out some really big relics from your graveyard and getting something much weaker out from your opponent's graveyard. I haven't really seen as many people use this card outside of higher level players, so I think that's probably the people who are looking to make this change, and for that reason, yeah, I can see it, it's understandable. Then on the provision side, provision increased by 1, Magic Compass. Yet another card that got changed last time, but is getting that change undone here. I was surprised that it got that buff in the first place, so I'm not surprised to see people reversing that here. And obviously, we know what a 10 provision Magic Compass plays like. Golden Necker. That is a card that I thought was one of, if not the most likely to get changed last go round, and somehow that didn't happen. I personally didn't vote for it just because I assumed that enough people were going to vote for it that it was going to happen no matter what. Obviously that didn't happen, at least not until now. So yes, I don't see it very often personally, but at least the number of people I've heard saying that at the high levels in particular, this is an extremely strong card. I think, yes, it probably was overdue. Mutagenerator is one of the best sources of carryover in the game. Yes, it doesn't directly have any points when you play it on that turn, but still very strong card, and I can see where people are coming from, increasing the provision cost of that. Reaver Scout, another card, got a provision buff last time, provision nerf this time, so just canceling out the previous vote. Personally, I thought it was a little alarming that the Reaver Scouts got that temporary provision buff down to 5 provisions, so I would personally prefer for them to be at 6, especially now that Reaver Hunters are back to being usable. Obviously, these two are pretty common to play together, so having you be relevant and having you be a little bit weaker is probably good. Otherwise, these two could pop off in a way that we don't really want to see. Enraged Cyclops, this is one that we voted for. It was a card that I personally think was one of the most obvious signs of Ogroids being a little bit stronger than they ought to be, because most 4 provision cost cards max out at 7 or 8 points, and although technically Enraged Cyclops wasn't an immediate 10-point slam, it usually was, and in the rare case that it wasn't, it would take 1, maybe 2 turns to get up to 10 power, and that was just a little too powerful, a little too consistent for 4 provision cost card, even once you factor in that you had to build your deck with a bunch of Ogroids in it, because let's be honest, that wasn't that difficult to do. The Ogroids were good enough that that wasn't much of a trade-off. Then on the provision decrease side, the Eternal Eclipse, this was something that got a provision nerf last time, now provision buff, so canceling out the previous month's votes once again. I had heard a lot of people complaining about this, suggesting that cultists were a pretty big problem. Personally, I haven't had that much of an issue with them myself, so to me, increasing it to 15 provisions didn't seem totally necessary, but at least I could understand where people were coming from, so I'm a little surprised to see this drop back down to 14. Vilgefort's another card that got a provision nerf last time, now getting provision buffed to go back to 9 provisions. This is a card that we voted for last time. He's a very complicated card to evaluate that I've discussed extensively in previous videos and in previous comments to those videos, and I can't go into all those details here, but obviously I think he was better served at 10 provisions, using base Geralt as my primary point of comparison. Open Sesame, yet another card that got a provision nerf last time, now provision buffed, back to where it used to be at 5 provisions, so it's back to where it was for most of its existence. Thirsty Dame and Slave Driver, both cards that got provision nerfs last time up to 6 provisions, this time getting provision buffs, dropping them back down to 5 provisions, so once again, a couple of cards that people should be familiar with at their current provision value. Obviously, the Nilfgaard status spam archetype got a whole bunch of nerfs in the first round of the Balance Council votes, including Thirsty Dame, which I know caught a lot of people's attention and had a lot of people thinking that that might have been an overcorrection, so not too surprising to see people put Thirsty Dame back to 5 provisions. And Slave Driver, Nazca Sergeant's best friend, another card that I honestly don't think should be a bronze, because from a balance standpoint, as the developers themselves have previously stated, the game is designed around playing 1 card per turn. But since Slave Driver is a bronze card, and you can play multiple copies of it, and use it to play other copies of other bronze cards that can create multiple cards per turn, like Nazca Sergeant, I do still think there may be some issues there. But somewhat similarly to Nilfgaard's status spam, Nilfgaard soldiers also got a fair number of nerfs in the previous patch, so not too surprising to see players go back on that this time round. But with that being said, that is absolutely the takeaway from this round of changes. More than half of these changes were to reverse last month's vote, including 100% of the provision decreases. And if that continues, that can be a big problem. Yes, obviously last time was the first vote, people were still learning the system, so maybe we made some ill-informed mistakes. And so maybe that means that this time in particular we'll have more corrections to make than we will on future occasions. However, if this becomes the norm, where half or more of the changes are to undo last month's vote, then that means we're just going back and forth on the same cards and never actually making any long-term changes. And at that point, the cards we change make no difference whatsoever, because all the changes get undone anyway. And for that reason, I think we really need to increase the number of cards that change per category per month. Something that CDPR has said they're listening to feedback on. Because at least that way, even if we have a few cards that we want to change back from the previous vote, we still have enough slots remaining to make at least some changes to other cards. Because as this stands, with so little net change, Gwent could get very stale very quickly. Well, that's my quick reaction to all the cards that just got changed from the most recent Gwent Balance Council votes. It's still way too early to talk about voting for next season, but I'll circle back on that topic later in the month once we've had more time to play with the latest changes. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you next time.